So we're doing a data migration together, either a full system migration, an aircraft phase-in, or maybe a fleet phase-in or phase-out. But what I'd like to talk to you about today is our data migration process. Contrary maybe to the popular belief, it's much more than moving data from A to B. And other than Exin only doing things, we really need to do it together. First of all, we always start with a thing we call data mapping. So we'd like to know where your data needs to come from. So where your aircraft status is, what's telling us how your fleet is at that moment. And that list always starts very small, with maybe your main engineering system and a few small side sources. But you will see quite rapidly when we start a project like this, that list becomes longer and longer and longer. And the reason is not very surprising, at least to our experience. And as you might know yourself as well, during the usage of a system, you might find a thing, or don't actually not find a thing you'd like to know about the aircraft, or not in the exact format you wanted. And then the easiest way, of course, is to quickly grab an Excel and make something yourself. Well, that Excel will slowly, of course, start becoming your main daily driver instead of the system. And next to you doing that, of course, also colleagues around you might have a similar issue, or another issue with the same result, is that they make something themselves. And then maybe the maintenance planning department will do a similar thing. Flight ops might do a similar thing. Creates a situation where the system itself is not trusted anymore, and an aircraft resides in all kinds of different places, and well, not very uncommon, also conflicting, of course, with each other, because people might have a slightly different version than you on the same aircraft. So that data mapping is vital to the data migration process, is to find all those sources and to figure out which one is true, which one might be a bit less true or less recent in this case. So when we pull all that data together, we at Exin tend to not only look at the ones and zeros, so the IT aspect of things, but actually at the airworthiness aspect more. We'd like to know the actual contents of your data. So does the maintenance history make sense against your utilization, compared to your component and installation removals on the aircraft? Is the actual configuration correct, or is there a mismatch there? I think everyone experienced maybe before a situation where an aircraft, in theory, should have 3 engines instead of 2, according to a system. So that's really the things we look at together first. Where are the gaps, where are the holes, and identify those. Map out that picture of what the aircraft data is correct and what is not correct. And often the longer an aircraft has been in the organization, the longer a system has been in the organization, the more gaps and holes there are, which is unfortunately a natural flow of things. But next to identifying it, together we also like to really look into how to solve it. So from our experience, we have some ideas, tricks, maybe some additional data sources we can put to the table. From your experience, you know your aircraft best, you know your fleet best. You have some better ideas where to source some things. We might need to also pull off some technical records, or approach an OEM itself for the latest status. So together we come up with all these different ways on how to make that data complete and trustworthy again. So kind of a new base status. This is the status of the aircraft. during that process, you will see that we also start talking a lot about data standards. And depending on the organization you work for, the team you work for, those data standards might be there in more or lesser form. But in a lot of cases, it's never ideal yet. How do we write ATA chapters? Which positioning codes do we use? We write part number, for example, I think. So far, I've never come across a project where there were no duplicate part numbers in the system. So on one aircraft, part A was installed, on the other aircraft, part A was also installed, but with a different part number notation. So those standards are vital to getting the aircraft data back to, let's say, a healthy status, a trustworthy status. But even more vital, of course, to make those standards together and make those the base standards for how you approach the aircraft or full system in the future. Once we've defined those standards together, we'll implement them in the data set, and then we're ready to move the data from A to B in this case. However, before we do a full move, we also need to look into the processes around the system. How do you work in your department, but how do you also work with the system you're using? Why? Okay, we now have the standards defined. We now have a clean set of data, but that came into a state like it was because of a reason, because things might not be clear around how to work with a system. There might be not functionality in the system that needs to be done otherwise, but there might also be a different interpretation of how to work between you and your team or between departments. So a major step in preventing these issues in the future is to look at your organization. How do you work? How do I safeguard my CAMO and my MRO processes? And what are the capabilities of my system and how do I use those? So again, together we look at what would be the best way forward to work with it. What are the shortcomings now and how to improve on those? Once those are defined, then we're ready to move things to wherever it needs to go. Then lastly, it's nice, of course, we came up with all those ideas together. We came up with new processes, new standards, and we now moved into the system. But of course, reality is always different than theory, so things will need to change in the future. So during a data migration or more after data migration, we hand you tools, automatic validations, automatic reports, the same things we did during the data migration itself, for you to help check on a periodic basis the status, the health of your aircraft data, and identify issues, which for sure will happen again, early. And the most important thing is, once those are identified, instead of going back to your Excel sheet and grabbing the easy short-term solution, it's of course important at that moment, the new way of working is that the issue is addressed immediately in an appropriate way to prevent those things accumulating again for the future. So that's how we do a data migration at Exit. Much more than moving data from A to B. It's actually like your daily business, a full engineering process.